Okay, I've got my picture of George Washington, and now I'm going to create a Visual Studio program, an XNA program. So let's go to File, New, Project. And I want an XNA Game Studio 4.0 Windows game, and we're going to call this Image George. And I'm going to put that on my SkyDrive folder. And I don't need the start page here. I don't know if I can close it yet. Okay, here it is. And the first thing I want to do is, well, actually the first thing I want to do is just a little bit of housekeeping here. Let's always put a comment with your name at the top. And a brief description of what the program does. Then we're going to get rid of all these comments here that start with 3 gray slashes, because they're always the same every time, and once you've seen them once, you don't really need to read them again. Okay, update and draw is the last one. Okay, you can leave the other comments in, but take away those ones that start with 3 slashes. Okay. So now I've cleaned up my program a little bit, and images are content. Content has to be added to your program before you can do anything with it. So a picture is an existing item. So we go over here, we right click on the content item over here in Solution Explorer, and we choose Add, and then we choose Existing Item. And then we have to navigate to, I put mine on SkyDrive, I put it in the CSCI 201 folder, and called it my content folder. And it's going a little too far. There he is, and add that. Okay. So the content is now part of my project, but I can't do anything with it unless I've got a variable in the program to manipulate it. And images are always going to be texture 2D. And it was supposed to do the 2D for me. There we go. And I'm going to call this George texture. Okay. And with content, what you have to do is you have to load it in. So there is a content.load method, and in angle brackets you put the type, and this is going to be a texture 2D. And then in parentheses, and you give a string which has quotation marks around it that is the same name as our content over here, but without the file extension on the end. So it's going to be George Washington. And this part is not case sensitive. Okay, so now I have loaded it into my program, and before I can do anything with it, I have to, before I can see anything, I have to know how to draw it on the screen. So drawing is done in the draw method. So before we can do any drawing, remember we have to do a sprite batch.begin, and we have to do a sprite batch.end, and then put all of our drawing methods in between. So in between, I want sprite batch.draw. If you're drawing text, it's draw string. If you're drawing an image, it's the draw method. And when I do the left parenthesis here, I get a list that says 1 of 7, and if I were to scroll through this, I would see that there are different versions of the draw method, each with a different argument list. And the argument lists, I think, kind of get longer as you work your way through the list here, but for the time being, we're just going to use version number 1 here. And it looks like it requires 3 arguments. It requires a texture, which we have. It requires a rectangle, which indicates where that will be drawn on the screen, and it needs a color, which can just be a constant. We don't have the rectangle yet, but we can at least do part of this. We can put in George texture, comma, and then I don't have a rectangle, so I'm going to skip that and For color, use white most of the time. If you use white, the picture will look exactly as it did in the original. If you pick a color other than white, it will tint the color to whatever color you chose. And most of the time, you're probably not going to want to do that. So we do need a rectangle now to make this work. And we haven't done rectangles before, but a rectangle is a pretty simple concept. In order to define a rectangle on the screen, you need to know where it begins, and it's going to begin in the upper left-hand corner of the rectangle, and that's going to be an X and a Y coordinate. And once you know where the upper left-hand corner is, then you need to know how wide it is, you need to know how tall it is. So there are going to be 4 numbers involved in making up a rectangle, and there happens to be a built-in type called rectangle, and since George is going to be what we draw in the rectangle, we're going to call it George Rectangle. And we're going to initialize it. We can get rid of this comment now. And we're going to initialize it in initialize, and it's got 4 fields. So George rectangle dot x equals 0. George rectangle dot y equals 0. So we'll start him out in the upper left-hand corner. And George rectangle dot width, we know he's 100 pixels, so we'll set that equal to 100. And George rectangle dot height, we know he's also equal to 100 for height, and so we'll set that equal to 100. So this should get a picture of George in the original size in the upper left hand corner of the screen if I run it. And let's try to run it right now and see what we get. And apparently we're not going to run it right now, so I must have made a mistake here somewhere. So let's choose no, and it tells us there's an argument missing. Oh sure, I declared it and I forgot to go back and put it in. So we need George rectangle down here. Now let's try to run it, and I think we'll get better results this time. And it's still not going to work. It says that I have an error with my argument here, or my argument list, and I know which one it is. The color white is a constant, so that's not going to be a problem. The rectangle, if you pause the mouse over, it tells us it's 0, 0, 100, 100. But then if you pause the mouse over George texture, it says it's null. And what I forgot to do was, when I said I was reading in the content, I wasn't actually doing anything with it after I read it in. So I have to say George texture equals. Okay? And that will read the picture and it'll put it in the variable. Otherwise it's reading the picture but it's not putting it in any place. So let's stop this and let's try it one more time, and let's see if we can get it right this time. And there it is. George is in the upper left hand corner, and we'll stop the program and just go back and do a quick review here. I need if I'm going to draw images on the screen, I need to store the image in a texture variable, and it's good to give it a descriptive name with texture on the end, because you're probably going to have several things that start with the word George here, and this will be true with almost anything that you do. We also need a rectangle to indicate where it's supposed to be drawn on the screen, and again, put the word rectangle on the end of that. Initialize the 4 fields of the rectangle, and read in the texture, and don't forget to put the variable on the left side. And we're not doing any updating yet, we're just drawing it, and the simple draw method we're using for now is going to be the one that requires a texture, the rectangle to draw it in, and the color. And we'll stop this video and continue with our program in the next video.